You're listening to the Ordinary Vegan Podcast, where we teach you everything you need to know about adopting a plant-based diet full or part-time. Our goal is to empower you to live a long and healthy life. You can find today's show at ordinaryvegan.net or on iTunes. If you have any questions, please send an email to questions@ordinaryvegan.net.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Ordinary Vegan Podcast, number 44. Am I an empath? You might be saying, what is an empath and why should I care? Well, I have all the answers here in this week's podcast. And before we start, I have a few questions for you to ponder. Do you often feel the pain of others? Do you feel drained after being around certain people for too long? Do you find yourself caring for or taking care of others more than yourself sometimes? Do you have a sensitivity to large crowds, strong odors, or light? Do you feel feelings deeper, harder, and longer than others? Do you possess a strong intuition? Does being in a crowded place overwhelm you? And last but not least, have you had a conversation with a stranger and could tell without them saying a word about it that they were deeply troubled or sad? If so, you may be an empath. And there is nothing wrong with that. People, animals, and children are drawn to empaths like magnets. And if you focus on the benefits of being an empath, you will be creating a life where your gift is adding to your life instead of draining you. And we are going to explore the traits, challenges, and survival tips with Dr. Judith Orloff, an expert on the subject of empaths. I know this is an unusual topic for the Ordinary Vegan Podcast, but I want to devote more podcasts in the future to help you with all kinds of life strategies, because we all know that achieving and maintaining emotional well-being is just as important to your health as nutrition. And when you get a better sense of your true nature, you realize you are not alone or different and that you are actually pretty special, even though it may be hard sometimes. I know growing up, and still to this day, I need a lot of alone time, especially after large family gatherings, parties, etc. My girlfriend asked me once, "Don't you get lonely?" And I said, no, without any hesitation. There is a big difference between loneliness and wanting to be alone. So I plan to do lots of emotional exploring in some of our upcoming podcasts. Before I introduce Dr. Orloff, if we haven't met, my name is Nancy Montori, and I am the founder of this podcast and the website ordinaryvegan.net. I advocate a plant-based diet for health and wellness, for animal welfare, and for the planet. A whole foods plant-based diet is a way of eating that celebrates plant foods and cuts out unhealthy food like added sugars, refined grains, and processed foods. Plant-based diets have been linked to a number of health benefits and helps you cut down your odds of getting heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer, to name just a few. Also, reducing your consumption of animal products can benefit the environment and help protect animals who are solely bred for consumption and treated inhumanely. Whether you add a few plant-based meals to your diet every week or you commit to a vegan diet full-time, you are making a difference. So thank you for being here. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Judith Orloff, MD, is a New York Times best-selling author who wrote the book, The Empath's Survival Guide, Life Strategies for Sensitive People. Dr. Orloff is a psychiatrist, an empath, and intuitive healer. And she is on the UCLA Psychiatric Clinical Faculty. Dr. Orloff also specializes in treating empaths in her private practice. She passionately believes that the future of medicine involves integrating all this wisdom to achieve total wellness. Dr. Orloff's work has been featured on the Today Show, CNN, Oprah Magazine, USA Today, and Dr. Orloff has a popular TEDx talk with over 500,000 views. So, now, let's meet Dr. Judith Orloff. Hi, Dr. Orloff, and thank you so much for joining us on the Ordinary Vegan Podcast.
I'm very excited to be here.
Well, one of the main reasons I reached out to you on this show is that I find that many people in the Ordinary Vegan community are especially sensitive to issues like animal cruelty, environmental issues, and many have a strong bond with nature. And for many, those issues are the key factors in their decision to explore veganism.
Yes.
And I wonder if many of my listeners out there are empaths and how knowing that piece of information can help them. And from everything I have read, no one knows the challenges of being an empath better. So can we start this out by you telling our audience what exactly is an empath?
Well, I wrote the Empath Survival Guide to define what an empath is. And so people who are empaths and sensitive and intuitive can identify themselves and don't think they're crazy or neurotic or making things up. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm also an empath. And so I combine those two parts of myself to help treat patients. And, I use my empath nature in all of my life. So an empath is somebody who is very open and sensitive and loving, but we tend to have not the normal defenses that other people have. And so we take on the world's angst into our own bodies and other people's stress or anger or resentments into our own bodies. And this can drain us if we don't learn any strategies. So I wrote the Empath Survival Guide to offer people strategies on how do you stay open, how do you stay sensitive and loving and intuitive and caring, and yet not take on the stress of others. That's a key skill.
So what are the telltale signs that you are an empath?
In the beginning of the book, there's a self-assessment test with numerous questions. And one, for instance, is, have you been labeled as, quote, overly sensitive all your life? 2, do you get drained in crowds and need a lot of alone time to replenish yourself? Are you overwhelmed by noise, smells, or excessive talking? Yes, empaths are often very sensitive to smells and sound, and they replenish themselves in crowds. Or do you tend to absorb the stress of other people into your own body? You're taking on other people's emotions. And then in terms of food, empaths often overeat to protect themselves, to put a guard up from absorbing all the angst of the world. And so a lot of empaths tend to be overweight because they want that protective padding to stop the absorption process, which of course isn't a healthy coping mechanism, but it's what people do a lot. And there are other ways, of course, to handle it that are much more healthy. And also empaths prefer smaller gatherings to large gatherings. So I really don't go to large parties very much because they don't appeal to me unless it was a very special reason. And I prefer one-to-one, or just small groups, or, I like being alone a lot. I'm a writer, so I enjoy being with nature. Empaths often have a deep connection to nature, and they have a sensitivity to energy, and that, comes in very powerfully with regard to food, because food is energy. And so empaths can feel the quality of the energy that is transmitted from the food into their own bodies. So, for instance, a lot of unprocessed sugar would be terrible for an empath's body because it would make them have mood swings and go on sensory overload.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, but what is the difference between an empath and how do you know the difference between an empath and a sensitive person with lots of compassion?
Yeah, well, a highly sensitive person is somebody who has highly attuned senses. That light is very strong, sound, they're very sensitive to sounds, smells, touch, movement, but they don't go as far as an empath in that they're not emotional sponges. They don't absorb the energy of other people or the news into their body, and they don't necessarily have highly attuned intuition. As empaths, there are many kinds of empaths. There are animal empaths, there are food empaths, empaths who have a particular connection to food and can use it almost as a healing art. They're very sensitive to the energy of food. And so highly sensitive people don't always go on to the deeper levels of intuition that empaths have.
How does someone become an empath? And can childhood neglect or abuse play a role in creating an empath? Or are you just born that way?
Yeah, I write about that in the book. And empaths can have many factors contributing to what makes their constitution. And some babies are just born empathic. Now, I worked delivering babies in my medical school training, and some babies come out like little Buddhas, and their energy field is just wide open, where others come out a lot more closed. And so I think there's some genetic predilection to why somebody becomes empathic if it runs in the family. But also trauma can play a role. Because if you were raised by abusive, narcissistic, alcoholic, or neglectful parents, what happens is that you don't get the nurturing and the self-soothing that you would get from healthy parenting. And so your defenses are worn down. You're raw. You're like a wire without insulation. You weren't given the kind of warm, fuzzy protection that healthy parenting will bring. And so empaths often have their defenses stripped away, so they're wide open to everything. And this can happen as a result of trauma. And so part of empathic healing, if trauma was involved, is, dealing with the post-traumatic stress of whatever happened in childhood. So you don't, always stay hypervigilant. Or you don't always have a huge startle response that is often associated with trauma. So it's just genetics, trauma. People are born with a temperament of being empathic. I think all three can figure in.
Can we talk about empaths and relationships? I read that there's a connection with empaths and codependency. So do empaths usually get caught up in caretaking roles?
Empaths love to be caretakers. They're fixers, they're helpers, they're pleasers. They want to help everybody and everything. But the problem is that they do this at the expense of their well-being. And so they often give too much. And the healing, and what I talk about in the Empath Survival Guide, is how do we find that balance? What is healthy giving versus over-helping? Or codependency is an obsessive preoccupation with another person. That's what codependency is. And so you don't want to get to that point. You want to be able to help people, but not do it for them. Codependents want to get in there and fix everything. You want to learn how to hold a space for someone and be supportive, but not get in their energy field and take anything away from them. You have to believe in the dignity of their own path, and you have to give people that.
What is the difference between an emotional empath and a physical empath?
Well, an emotional empath is somebody who's able to sense and absorb the energy of emotions coming from other people, even when they're unspoken. And they often become an emotional sponge where they can sponge up those emotions. So whereas they might have felt fine before they met a person, but the person was anxious, and now suddenly the empath is anxious. So the emotional empath can literally take on the emotions of the other person. And the physical empath is somebody who can take on the physical symptoms. They make wonderful medical intuitives because they can sense in their body what's going on in other people's bodies. But the downside is they can take on the aches and pains and the symptoms. So there are skills such as breathing, such as meditation, such as stretching or being in water or getting out in nature that can help relieve taking on symptoms. But it has to be a lifestyle change. Once you find out you're an empath, there's certain lifestyle changes you're going to have to make in order to shine, in order to be vibrant. Because we empaths are a little bit different than other people. We require different kinds of things to refuel.
I also read that there's a small part of the population who have something called mirror touch synesthesia, which is a strange thing, which visual senses get mixed up and they are able to literally feel their body being touched when observing someone else's body. Have you ever run across that, and how common is that?
Yeah, I have. I actually did an interview for a synesthesia site fairly recently on Psychology Today. And it's, there are a lot of synesthetics out there, and there are different types of synesthesia. One is when you see colors when you listen to music. So where you have two senses paired together, or you hear music when you're writing. But what you're talking about, mirror touch synesthesia, is one explanation for being an empath. And the mirror touch synesthetics can literally feel their bodies being touched or feel what's going on in other people's bodies and their own.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how do we stop absorbing other people's energy and stress? And how do we keep ourselves safe from that?
Right. Well, one thing is that empaths must learn to set boundaries. And you must realize that no is a complete sentence. To be able to, have healthy time management so you're not rushing from one thing to the next, and then going on anxiety overload and sensory burnout. Because that's what happens with empaths, or else they develop autoimmune diseases because their immune system gets stressed by all the excessive sensory input coming in with no relief. So sometimes empaths have adrenal fatigue, which I also write about in the Empath Survival Guide. So you've got to learn strategies. And in the book, the whole book is devoted to strategies. And one of which is don't hold your breath when you're around stress, or if you've picked up some emotion or feeling you haven't, picked up before. Breathe it out. Use the breath to exhale it back into the matrix of the environment. Don't hold your breath. People often get scared and hold their breath as a sign of fear, but don't do that. Keep breathing out any tension, any anxiety, any strange symptom that might have jumped into your body. Breathe it out and it will go out. Another technique is the 3-minute heart meditation that I describe in the book, where you sit, center yourself, focus for 3 minutes, focusing on the heart energy. And this is the purifier of the body. When you focus on the heart, it causes purification throughout the whole body. So any sludge you might have picked up or any toxicity you picked up, the heart can purify it so that it will dissipate from your own body. And then a quick tip is you can smudge your space also. If you have sweetgrass, if you have sage, you can smudge the energy of a space to clear it out if you feel unpleasant vibes in the space.
I noticed in your book that you use a lot of visualization. Can you tell us how our visualization helps and how does that work exactly? I'm sure that a lot of people aren't familiar with it.
How can a visualization help you release toxic energy?
And how does it work exactly?
Well, a visualization is an active tool that shifts your levels of consciousness and moves energy from point A to point B. So, for instance, a visualization I love when energy gets stuck in my body is that I visualize myself as an open window and just let the breeze, the soft breeze and the wind blow through me. I'm doing absolutely nothing but enjoying the feeling of the breeze blowing through me, and it takes any kind of negativity or stress or Anything I don't want in my body, it takes it away. It just takes it with the air. So you can use the elements as vehicles for cleansing the body. So just picturing myself as an open window with a soft breeze going through will help to cleanse my body. So the visualization is a way of activating consciousness.
That sounds nice. Do empaths have to be especially careful about exposing themselves to negative news coverage and social media? Because, you could see that the last few years, anxiety levels are just so amped up. And I'm wondering if, and there is a rise in autoimmune disease. Do you think that has anything to do with social media?
Oh, most definitely. And the news cycles and too much information coming through and horrible toxic energy that's being dumped on us every day. So you want to really limit your exposure to that. The problem is it can be addictive. So you need to deal with any addictive tendencies you have and set a time limit. If you want to become informed, I have a friend who just watches Stephen Colbert to become informed. Doesn't have to read the newspaper or go to Google, but you have to find your own way that feels good. Find your own way and limit the time. Don't just stay glued to the cable news stations. That's like a toxic dump site. They'll just dump all over you.
Yes, they will. That's for sure.
Yeah, and empaths suffer as a result of that.
I know growing up that I always needed a lot of alone time. And my family used to make fun of me because I came from, a big family, and they didn't understand it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And do you think empaths need more alone time than, your normal everyday person?
Oh, yes. That's one of the, key tools for being an empath is having adequate alone time where nobody's bothering you, where nobody's making requests, where you could just be quiet in your own presence, in your own company, doing whatever it is you wish without any intrusion. That's key for an empath sanity.
So we love science around here, and my research actually shows that there is scientific basis for the term empath. Can you tell us what is the mirror neuron system, electromagnetic fields, and increased dopamine sensitivity?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of research elements that I talked about in the book, and one is the mirror neuron system. And the mirror neuron system is the network in the brain of neurons that are responsible for compassion. And so when you feel compassionate towards somebody, if your mate gets hurt, suddenly the mirror neurons will flash on and you'll have extra compassion for your mate as if you feel it in your own body. And it's thought that empaths have hyperactive mirror neuron systems where they're just functioning at a much higher level than even, let's say, normal empathy. And so that's one explanation of what's going on in the empath soul, why we feel so deeply and why we care so much, about so many people we may not even know.
So there is scientific evidence linking that to being an empath?
Yes, exactly. Compassion. They're the compassion neurons.
And how about the electromagnetic fields? Do we all carry around an electromagnetic field?
Oh, yes, definitely. The brain has an electromagnetic field. The heart has an electromagnetic field. You can measure it with EKG that measures the heart's electromagnetic field, and EEG measures the brain's. And so it's thought that through our electromagnetic fields, we send out information. And empaths can pick this up, or intuitives can pick this up, through that vehicle of the electromagnetic field, which makes perfect sense to me.
What kind of information?
Intuitive information, where you can get a sense of, flashes about people, whether they're ill, whether they're happy, what struggles they're going through. Any information about anger they might be feeling. People carry their emotional bodies in their electromagnetic fields, so you might be able to sense their emotions.
And what is the science behind the increased dopamine sensitivity?
Well, it's thought that dopamine is a pleasure hormone. And so extroverts tend to love dopamine hits and boosts. That's why they go out to big parties and big stadiums and big events, because the dopamine is just flowing in those places. But empaths don't enjoy going to those big places, and they're a lot more sensitive to dopamine, so they don't need as much. That's why they're happy meditating at home or playing with their animals or going for a swim in a lake, just a quiet swim, because empaths don't need the same amount of dopamine rush, the hit. It's almost like an addictive pleasure surge that extroverts just live for.
Since this is a food blog, can we talk a little bit more about food empaths? And is this some kind of missing link in weight management?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because empaths often eat to protect themselves from sensory overload, from too much information coming in, from energy vampires, from toxic energy. And so they reach for food in order to build more body mass. And the fatter you are, the more padding you have to protect you from the negative energy of the world. So, I've had discussions with mediums I visited Lilydale, which is a beautiful mediumship community in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, I forget. But in any case, I had talks with those women. They're really big women, and they feel they need to be that big in order to not pick up the physical symptoms and aches and pains of their patients. You see, but the difference is when you're an empath and you learn how to center and protect yourself in ways other than overeating, that's a much more healthy alternative.
So let's talk about the positive side of being an empath. What is it like to love an empath?
Oh, you have a loving, kind, creative, intuitive kind of connector to nature, giver, someone who's interested in real partnership. You have a very loyal, fun, sensual, intuitive partner.
That sounds
but
nice.
One that's also sensitive and needs her alone time or his alone time and needs to not be around, strong perfume because that smells too strong for empaths. So they have their own unique sensitivities. In my relationship that I'm in, we have constant conversations about what feels good to me and what doesn't, and to be able to, negotiate that with a mate.
Is it true that empaths tend to take care of their environment as a way to take care of themselves?
Oh, yes. Empaths do well in a minimalistic kind of environment, with not a lot of clutter and sacred objects around, very simple environment. And so it's always good for empaths to have the most simple and clearest environment possible, and with really soft sheets and soft blankets and really sensually appealing things, objects on the skin and materials and textures and patterns.
My final question, Dr. Orloff, is in your book, you say you encourage empaths to develop their sensitivities even more while staying centered. Now that sounds a little scary to me. How do empaths do that exactly? And why should they do it? Why do they need to develop their sensitivities?
Well, I feel that empathy is the trait that's going to save the world. And you don't want to have a bunch of empaths out there who are just so overwhelmed by the world they can't function. And so as you develop the grounding and centering techniques in the book, and you eat the proper foods that can support an empath's energy and well-being, food is very important. And the vegan diet, of course, is the healthiest and the purest. Then the empath can feel grounded when they take care of their physical body, and they could feel safer to open up their sensitivities in the world because they have the skills. If I pick up something in my body, I know how to get rid of it. So I don't panic. But a lot of new empaths that I treat in my private practice, because I specialize in treating empaths and sensitive people, they're just overwhelmed with all these symptoms and don't know how to sort through it. So it takes some time and some strategies. But once you do, it's amazing. You're sensitive, you're loving, you're intuitive, you're passionate, you can feel life, you love nature. It's just an amazing way to live. I would never want to live any differently.
That's interesting because it makes me think that empaths, there are certain occupations that empaths should embrace, and there are certain occupations they probably shouldn't be leaning towards.
Yeah, that's true. There's a chapter in the book on empaths and work. And yeah, some jobs like office politics, or sales jobs or working in the public aren't so good for empaths. But, having a home office or being a writer or having some kind of business where there's low stimulation going on, where you're not having loudspeakers blaring in your ear every 2 seconds, would be much better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orloff, for being here today and sharing with us what it means to be an empath. There will be links to all your books and your workshops, and those workshops look really exciting in this week's show notes, and I thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Well, have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
Dr. Orloff is doing empath workshops and book signings all over the country, including Kansas City, New York City, Los Angeles, and Stockbridge, Massachusetts. You can go to this week's show notes at ordinaryvegan.net for all the links and information. I will also have a link to Dr. Orloff's best-selling books, including the Empath Survival Guide. You can find out more about empaths on Dr. Orloff's website, which is drdjudithorloff.com. Okay, that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for being here. You can find all the links for everything we spoke about today in this week's show notes. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Ordinary Vegan line of CBD products made from agricultural hemp. Vegan CBD oil from hemp is a natural plant food that is taking the wellness world by storm for its promising ability to help with anxiety, depression, PTSD, panic attacks, migraines, arthritis, addiction, and chronic pain. When I began hearing the testimonials from many of you in the Ordinary Vegan community, I was skeptical. But then I researched for 2 years and came to the decision that CBD oil is helping people get off medication for pain and anxiety and helping them live a life free of these disabilities. And there are so many CBD brands out there that are not safe or effective. So I made a decision that it was important for me to provide a safe, reliable, vegan CBD oil from hemp for our health and wellness community. You can find my CBD oil from hemp on my website at ordinaryvegan.net. And don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions at questions@ordinaryvegan.net. Please join us for the next podcast and make sure you subscribe. And if you get a minute, please leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. And don't forget to join our healthy and supportive community on Facebook. We are over 315,000 strong and growing. Just go to facebook.com/ordinaryvegan. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope this podcast and all my podcasts help you live a long and healthy life. And I look forward to serving you on my next podcast. Till next time.
Thanks for joining our plant-based community today. Together, we can accomplish great things. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of Ordinary Vegan's recipes and plant-based tips. If you have any questions or feedback, email us at questions@ordinaryvegan.net. Until next time.